Welcome to this edition of Security and Compliance Weekly. Today on our show, we welcome Patrick O'Reilly, co-founder and chief product officer for our sponsor, Cybersaint Security. We're going to talk about how our new virtual working world has finally forced risk and compliance teams at companies to take a serious look at the automation of compliance monitoring, or as Cybersaint likes to say, cyber risk and compliance automation is finally here. As a public service announcement, all responses to the PCI challenge today, and I imagine there will be quite a few, will be fulfilled with Irish whiskey, at least on my part. In our second segment, we're going to take some time to get to know one of our new co-hosts, Frederick Flea Lee, who debuted on the show last week, but we really didn't get a chance to talk to him and get to know him. So we're going to do that today. Join us as we continue our journey of tearing down silos and building bridges on Security and Compliance Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production. And now, it's the show that bridges the requirements of regulations, compliance, and privacy with those of security. Your trusted source for complying with various mandates, building effective programs, and current compliance news. It's time for Security and Compliance Weekly. Are you struggling to reduce your cybersecurity risks and meet compliance mandates? Wishing you could be proactive instead of reactive? You need a solution that integrates cybersecurity together to make it affordable, accessible from anywhere, and simplistic, so you can gain a return on investment on your resources. Cyrisma is your answer. It gives you a single interface to identify sensitive data, vulnerable systems, insecure configurations, track progress, and assign accountability. Visit securityweekly.com/Cyrisma today for a 7-day test drive and impress your leadership. That's Cyrisma, Cyrisma. The question is simple. Have any of the systems on my network been compromised? The answer is harder than it should be. Enter AI Hunter. Active Countermeasures has automated and streamlined techniques used by the best pen testers and threat hunters in the industry to create AI Hunter, a network threat hunting solution that does the first pass of a hunt for you to identify systems that are most likely to be compromised and scores the results on a scale from 0 to 100. You can then research those systems in depth with AI Hunter. Focus your valuable time on the systems that need your expertise with AI Hunter. Sign up for a personal demo today at securityweekly.com/ACM. The average cost to respond to an insider threat is $11.45 million. That's a lot of reasons why a functional insider threat program must be a core part of any modern cybersecurity strategy. To protect your organization's sensitive data and meet compliance requirements, you need controls in place to deter, detect, and disrupt insider threats. With ECRAN system, you can meet control requirements imposed by compliance mandates all within one insider threat management platform. Get your free 30-day trial at securityweekly.com/ECRAN. That's EKRAN, and fulfill your compliance requirements.
Welcome to episode number 55 of Security and Compliance Weekly, recorded on December 8th, 2020. For the record, the Discord server has already gone off track, so if you're not on it, you should jump on board and see what's going on. I am your host, Mr. Jeff Mann, and joining me today are my co-hosts, Mr. Scott Lyons, Mr. Josh Marpet, and Mr. Flea. Did I say that? Welcome, gentlemen. Hey, a few announcements. Yeah, come back to the show, Josh, and get off the Discord for a few minutes. I know you are. Hey, a couple announcements before we get into it. Scythe is offering a free Purple Team workshop where attendees can get hands-on on an isolated enterprise environment for 3 whole hours. It's scheduled for December 9th, which is tomorrow, which is the day before Security Weekly Unlocked, which is in 2 days. Let's do the math. You can register for this free workshop by going to securityweekly.com/Purple Team SW. Also, as I just mentioned, Security Weekly, in partnership with the Cyber Risk Alliance, is excited to present Security Weekly Unlocked, which is in 2 days, December 10th, 2020. This one-day virtual event will wrap up with the 15th anniversary edition of Paul's Security Weekly, which will all be happening live on YouTube. The party itself, which is a virtual party, which most of us are bummed about, is going to be 3 different panel discussions, which is our tradition for our holiday episode. So join in. It should be a fun and interesting, if not remote and lonely time. Get there by going to securityweekly.com/unlock to view the agenda and register for free. All right. Today, as mentioned, we are joined by Padraic O'Reilly, who is Chief Product Officer for Cybersaint Security. Padraic, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Hey, just to get things started, get the ball rolling, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your background, how you got to where you are today with Cybersaint, and by all means, tell us a little bit about Cybersaint and what's that all about.
Yeah. So it's been a long and winding road, but I didn't start out in cyber, and I didn't start out in compliance.
None of us did.
Yeah, right. And how do you wind up where you are? It's a good question. I started out in macroeconomic, modeling essentially, and early AI systems. And I went to school with a character named George Wren, and I knew him a little bit at school. Not terribly well. We had like a mutual friend in common. And I ran into him maybe 6 or 7 years ago here in Concord, Massachusetts, and he wanted to go surfing in the winter. And I didn't think that was a good idea, but I did it. So, we would go surfing in these wetsuits up on the coast in New Hampshire. And he said, I have something that I'm thinking of doing. He was the global CISO for Schneider at the time. That I think you might be interested in. And, I took a look at the problem in cyber, and I love your tagline, building bridges and burning silos, because
breaking them down, not necessarily burning them.
Well, building bridges. Is it burning?
I mean, a silo burning.
Breaking down silos. Silos.
Okay. Yeah. The concept is linking stuff together, and that's what I saw in the data, and right away, within 3 months we had a deck, and, within 6 months we had investors, and then 3 months after that we had an MVP. So, and cyber continues to fascinate me, and compliance. It just, the problems are so, they've been around a while, they're difficult to solve, they're complex. So that's a little background. And, on Cybersaint itself, once we got past MVP, we started to have customers who really had these use cases that helped us build out the product. So we were running a lot of controls early days and a lot of reports, and then we started to get bigger and bigger customers through the door, and that built in a bunch of workflow and extended the data model. And we built some NLP maybe 2-3 years ago. So some very large concerns came to us and asked us if we could do control mapping. So that's how we got into that. And that's how we've arrived at this moment where, large companies are looking to automate parts of their compliance program.
All right, we have a burning question on the Discord server, and it's not completely related, but people are kind of fixated, and we're not going to get beyond it. The 4-book set behind you, the book, the spines create a picture. Everybody wants to know, who is that?
Who is that? Well, my chief revenue officer thinks it's Pat Sajak, but it isn't.
That's not Sajak. What is he, crazy?
No, it's not Pat Sajak. That's Samuel Beckett. The existential playwright, kind of one of the presiding spirits of Irish literary tradition. So he would.
It's an Irish thing. Okay.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's an Irish thing, but it's also a compliance thing, because his thing was trying to escape futility, really.
Wow. That's deserving of a drink right there.
There you go.
That word. Here's to what you just said. All right. The very interesting background and very interesting nuggets already, and you're sort of answering our hot seat question. I think I know where you're going with it, but for formality's sake, we ask all of our guests the hot seat question, which is, where do you fall on what we like to call the security versus compliance continuum?
Yeah, and I would say that I'm. Can you maybe give me another sentence in support of that, just so that I can frame my answer properly?
Sure. I mean, one of the reasons we put this show together is because there's so many people working security and so many people working compliance,
Yeah.
and there the twain shall meet.
Right.
So we have set out to try to build bridges and tear down the silos, or burn them down, if you prefer,
Right.
to try to foster, collaboration. And my observation just from my career is I've met so many people that are really smart, really pursuing what's essentially the same problem on both
Yeah.
sides.
Yeah.
And I'm sort of flummoxed that why don't these people know that the other side exists? So we're trying to get them to work together. Does that help you?
Yeah, well, immensely. Actually, I think you've framed, the one of the central issues of the industry with that question. I just wanted to see if I understood it a little better.
Sure.
I would say we're in the middle there, trying to get everyone around the table. That's even just the NLP I built a couple of years ago is really leverages vulnerability theory, which has been out there for a while, right? But how does vulnerability theory map into controls? Can you do that in an automated way? Can the compliance people have a view into what IT is doing? I think that that really is the future. Building more and more communication, because there's so much great data out there. There's great data and applications. The IT people have a lot of great things, but it just doesn't make it across the entire organization, and it doesn't always make it up into risk. So I don't fall down on one side or the other. I'm trying to find ways to wire it all up and get everyone talking the same language.
Interesting.
Get everyone talking the
And
same language. That's a fascinating way of putting it. Because the part of the problem is not just the mindset, but the vernacular.
That's right.
And the idea that to speak risk and to speak security are two different languages is very, very close to my heart. And that's a fascinating point you raise. Can you, I'm sorry, I'm going to sort of pick on you for that. Can you expand on that?
No, go ahead.
So like when you say risk, compliance, security, these are all different languages. Not only do they use different terminology, but they use similar words and mean entirely different things with them. You say the word risk to a security person or to a compliance person, and holy crap, are they going to have different ideas of what you just said?
Yep.
And I'm curious about your experiences with that kind of thing, please, if you have any.
I do have it. I first had it as a consultant, and now I have it, building a software product and having different companies come to me with different risk metrics and ask, and sometimes they present them and they say, this is what risk is. And, it's a tricky area, really. And, I think the way I navigate it is by looking to the future, by understanding that, the conversation, if the conversation is going to come down to risk, you have some methodologies. You've got certainly NIST, you've got the FAIR model, you've got other risk models. And we try to be risk model neutral. But really what you're trying to do is have the conversation upstairs. If you're talking about risk, you're talking about it upstairs. Now, telemetry companies will throw risk scores out onto endless streams of data. They'll do it all day long. I don't know how helpful that's going to be in the end analysis, but it has to be accounted for. So everyone's idea of risk has to be accounted for to some extent. And then you have to get, again, everyone speaking the same language.
So how do you get, you've got as you put it, the telemetry company saying, oh, that's a 70% risk on this. That's a risk score of 70 or whatever on this telemetry data. And then you've got, or this stream of data, this threat intelligence, which a lot of companies call things threat intelligence when in fact they're not. But that's just a personal thing. You've got executives going, well, we're not really at risk, are we? And then you've got technologists at the bottom of the stack going, oh, we think we're doing our jobs okay. We're doing it the way we're supposed to do it. Right. So, I mean, how do you amalgamate all those scores together in such a way, and not scores, but those ideas together in such a way that they all understand the same thing in the same way and can act upon it consistently and reliably?
Wait, are you talking about quantification?
Well, I think I don't know that any one company could credibly claim they're doing that now. I think that they have their own, in-house methodologies and
Okay, no, sorry, I apologize. That was a pretty broad question. I'm terribly sorry. That was rude of me. But where in your world, and I guess Cybersaint's world, do you bring together meanings so that people are so where do you act as translator?
All over the place. So, for example, say we've got the big four in system doing, assessments on thousands of sites against the cybersecurity framework. One of the nice things about the CSF for me is it can be a lingua franca, and you can use it to drive metrics on a cyber program. And you can do sort of a solution cost modeling on top of it. You can do risk impact analyses on top of it. So we do it all over the place in the system, using large companies' historical data, using data they're putting in now. And what it's helping us do is refine this idea of finding, a more generalized, approach. And we've had to be very flexible, though, because, it's like you have to take in a history and a culture sometimes when you're dealing with that.
Oh, well said. Well said.
Right. And, that at times feels like we're bending ourselves into the, some sort of Gordian or knot or pretzel or something. But really what we're doing is building the structure to support the unification that, of risk, of compliance, of IT, of telemetry that we have to believe is coming to some extent.
So we've got a couple of absolutely adore what you're saying, by the way. Absolutely love it. But we've got a couple of points from Discord. One, Jim Gilson had a good point. CSF and the CSF, the cybersecurity framework, it's so generic. It's only a framework skeleton that lets companies fill out with their own content. Very well said, but you got to start somewhere, Jim, in my opinion. Right. And then Liam Downward from Cyrisma, actually, one of our sponsors. But how do you make it stand out when you have a maturity model that looks at risk through a general business risk, and you risk basically getting lost in the weeds when you start talking technical risk? I'm guessing, Liam, what you're talking about there. And you have so many different, not just languages, but viewpoints. You've got some people looking at risk from the business level, some people looking at risk from the technology level. You can look at it in a very microscopic view or a very macroscopic view. And it's, I'm sorry, I know we're stuck on this, but this is something that's so central to our building bridges point that I really wanted to hit on it, and I apologize.
No, don't apologize. This is a part of our company history. This question you're talking about, and it is cultural, and it is it's foundational. I would say that what we've seen over the last 2 years is more governance buy-in, right? So more buy-in at the level of the board and the C-suite. They tend to historically understand things in terms of risk, but it's financial risk. Right.
Yes. Business risk, financial risk. Yeah.
Is there any other kind of risk, though?
Of course, there's many other kinds of risk, many other kinds. But it's sort of, it comes down to what do you want to walk in and talk to the C-suite and the board about? In our largest use cases, you have to genuflect to some extent to the language that they understand. So, you can say way down in the weeds, on this most interesting part of IT, there's all sorts of risks that, are embedded. But unless you can sort of contextualize that upstairs, you may not get the resources, and you may be invisible in a sense of what you're doing. Your heroic efforts might go unnoticed. So this is why in our product, we try to build in ways to talk across these different stacks, because we don't want anyone to go unnoticed. We don't want, the craziest control deep in the weeds to have data missing from it. We don't want a conversation to not happen around that. But at the same time, we realize you're not going to talk about that in the boardroom. You're going to need to drive metrics over this very fine data to illuminate what you're doing at the top around decision making. But you have to sort of translate risk across the stack, and you have to translate many things across the stack. And you have to acknowledge that other parts of the organization might be speaking differently about things, and you have to learn how to talk in their language as well. So we help with that in the product.
Actually, I want to piggyback on like I think Jeff's initial point with regards to all risk is business risk. Or at least financial risk, because I think that actually gets to the heart of what it sounds like Cybersaint is trying to solve, which is this notion that at the end of the day, the board is saying like, hey, we only care about risk if it actually impacts the business, right? And I'm kind of curious, Patrick, like how exactly does Cybersaint help cascade some of those smaller, more fine detailed, more nuanced risks, like at the IT level, et cetera, back up to the board and help draw those connections, both for people at the C level, but also maybe some of the ICs doing the work on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, well, we do it really, to keep it as simple as possible, we do it from two sides. We do it having the metrics at the top. So we have, a risk register. We have, risk agnostic risk models in there. So we have the FAIR model, we have the 830, we have a simple version of 830 so that you can do likelihood and impact. And we allow you to attach control groupings, security groupings, as NIST calls them, to these individual risks. So you can create a business risk, you can create an operational risk, you can even create, an IT risk. We allow you to do risk on controls as well, so all the way down on tier 3. And then from the other side, what we're doing now is we're automating controls. So controls will have statuses, scores. We have many, many scoring models. And as long as the risk is associated with sort of the controls, the machine is all singing together. So that's really the simplest way to talk about it.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, would you agree or would you not?
Hold on, Josh, hold on. Josh, we need to have different languages.
Hold on. At the end of the day, Scott, would you agree or would you disagree that it all comes down to risk tolerance?
You're on mute, or at least I can't hear you.
I'm not on mute.
No, I can hear you now, Scott. Go ahead.
Okay, so would you agree? Would you agree or not agree that at the end of the day, it all comes down to the amount of risk tolerance that you're willing to deal with?
Yeah, I would agree, but in day-to-day practice, in order to understand risk tolerance, you have a fair amount to do to get there. So you have to do risk analysis before you can understand your tolerance, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I mean, so sort of. You have to do risk analysis before you understand which risks are within your tolerance. Your tolerance actually is determined by more dollar values than anything else.
Right.
If I have 40 million in the bank, I have a tolerance to up to that, or maybe half of that, or whatever. That's one way of measuring your tolerance. So I would sort of disagree with you there, but not by very much. Let's be clear.
Sure.
But I think that doing a proper risk analysis, and we're talking in Discord about the common language thing we were chatting about just a minute ago, the lingua franca, which I haven't heard that in a very long time. Well said, sir.
Rosetta Stone, yeah.
Rosetta Stone, whatever. But a common language of risk between executive, management, board, and technical levels, sort of the 4 levels of business, right. And not in order, of course. I screwed that up. Sorry, but something we came up with was the analogies, and we all have sort of analogies. We're discussing, I think it was Dimitri uses cars as his analogy of risk, and somebody else uses physical security, and so on and so forth. And it's almost like we should really build a common library of analogies, so a lingua franca of analogies of how to understand risk at the different levels, and then from there we can build a common language. I think it's adorable and hilarious.
Yeah, I like it. I like that idea because conversations that I get into around risk can quickly become a Tower of Babel.
Well, and that goes back to what we were saying early on in the show. I think Josh was saying that, the different silos that we're dealing with that exist within organizations and frankly within our industry use the same terms, but they have different meanings and different understandings of the meanings, and not just the meaning, but the implications and the interactions of the meanings, yes. Which makes it that much more complicated. I'm curious, though. Great discussion so far, and I've got many questions. The one that's last in my brain, so it shall be first out, is there a need to get not just a common language, but in terms of understanding risk? Maybe it's more a statement, and I'll ask you to comment on the board's idea, the management ownership's idea of risk and risk tolerance, given whatever it is, and security and risk folks come in that have a different sense of what they think the risk tolerance should be. Is it always sort of upstream? We understand what's bad and what's wrong and what's broken and what needs and what's danger, and we need to communicate that up. Or is there some room for no, we need to lighten up because, our purist view of risk and the bad things that could go on need to be tempered by sort of the corporate big picture. We really understand the business and the financial implications. I don't even know if I'm making sense, but
oh, you are making sense, because that's the kind of historical, if the board and the C-suite and IT and compliance were in various trenches, that's kind of the middle ground is, where that would get negotiated out. I think things have changed, though. In my view, when we work with large enterprise, and we're working with many, Fortune 500 companies, I think there's an understanding now across, the different business functions, that the days of IT being like, this is an outrageous risk, alarm, and nobody at the board level gets it. Those days I don't see existing anymore. People are now trying to find ways to get speaking the same language, and that is how we're building our software. They're coming to us and saying, look, we're losing this data, or look, we're stuck in red team SOC hell forever. We can't even get to preventative things. We can't even make a case upstairs about, cost benefit analysis. Help us do that. And then on the governance side, they're beginning to have some of their performance tied to cybermetrics as well. So they're in a reasonable frame of mind also. So I would say that formerly there used to be this kind of like, if you were down looking at the microscopic level, risks might amplify, in small ways, whereas the board might be like, but we don't even know what he's talking about. There's much more, there's a much more communitarian joint effort going on here. When we talk to enterprise, we're talking to 4 or 5 different departments at once to build automation. They're all on the call. And they're all trying to get on the same page with respect to the analytics they're going to do and the quality of the data they want, so that they can make the best case imaginable upstairs.
Let me ask you a somewhat probably oversimplified question, but I'm curious to get your insight. Is it your opinion that we need to, we security risk compliance folks need to learn the language of management? Or does there need to be a common language that we all speak?
I'll answer that by saying that I deal with a board myself, right? And I'm always trying to understand how they see, what we're doing and the decisions we make on a day-to-day basis, more operational. And I want their help. So, in order to get their help, I do have to at least perform the imaginative exercise of, well, how do they see it? And how could I make a compelling case to them in a way that they, that'll resonate for them? I mean, it's really as simple as that to me. And that's good practice in cyber compliance and just maybe in politics and human relations generally.
Life. Yeah.
I mean, that answer is generic enough to apply across the stack, I think.
Right. Well, let's shift gears then a little bit, and hopefully not set you up for failure here. But so you've got a solution. You're attempting to automate various security and compliance controls. At the risk of putting you on the spot, what language does your product speak?
A lot of different languages the product speaks. It speaks Java, it speaks JSON, it speaks vulnerability theory, it speaks.
Does it speak risk in multiple languages?
Yes.
How does it communicate its output and to what audience?
Yes, it does. We have many outputs that are risk analytics, and we do another aspect of risk analytics, which is called solution cost analysis. So you're able to game out remediation paths with various solutions, be they, people, process, or tech, and make that argument on and associate it with risk. So
is the output numbers and statistics?
Yeah.
And dare I say
math? It's dollar values, it's risk scores, it's graphics, it's KPIs, it's metrics, it's the ability to roll everything up into gold standard metrical structures, right? So that you can do that flexibly. If you have many different frameworks or control sets you're working on, you may want to roll them all into one container. And that's, from my viewpoint, the value of the CSF isn't necessarily that it's a really granular thing. It's more like a series of containers that you can put granular things in and understand them and drive dollars and risk calculations over those categories and subcategories and make compelling case for resourcing things.
Interesting. Let me put you on the spot again, because we've gone almost the whole episode and I haven't said my favorite three letters yet. PCI.
There it is.
How does your product help a company, and there's many of them that are beholden to PCI, a data security standard?
We help by providing the single pane of glass. PCI, one of the challenges of PCI is that it, down at the level of the, questions and the tests and the verifiability, you often have, people who don't touch controls much. They might have 10 different line items they have to answer on PCI. So the multi-tenancy with respect to users and the central pane of glass aspect of that was one of the first things we had to solve in the product to get companies out of spreadsheets, because spreadsheets are these things that you aggregate into cells and then you send the cells off, and the cells you put a date on it and then you have to recollate and the combinatorics get nightmarish. When you have it all in one central place and you have different user role structures, you can put people down who are on the weeds on PCI. You can put them down where they can attach evidence and make a case down there. So that's our PCI. So we've had PCI in from the start.
Interesting. And you sort of touched on another question that I was curious about. In terms of output, in terms of who is the consumer of your product, you implied or alluded to that you're able to provide value to lots of different, perhaps, consumers or users of the output. Am I picking up on that correctly?
Yeah, you are. That's correct. I mean, and that really has to do with how the product's grown over time. So first, we were doing reports for practitioners. Then the reports were for practitioners and for their bosses, and then reports were for risk teams. There were reports for compliance teams. And then when we built in a larger structure of risk into the platform, the reporting was really, board level and C-suite level, and the dashboarding as well. So live in real time on the screen, you're seeing risk and solution cost modeling that's continuous. So as we automate more, that's going to be even more continuous, because the control data is going to be day to day, week to week, whatever the cadence may be.
Interesting. All right.
Patrick, earlier. Oh, go ahead, Jeff.
No, please. I was just going to say, anybody else have questions? So jump in.
Yeah. I know earlier you talked a little bit about leveraging and some of newer features you've added with regards to natural language processing. I'm kind of curious as how that's playing out for you. What was some of the motivation of actually even adding that, and even longer term, where do you actually see the future of NLP with regards to things like compliance and risk assessments is going to play out, not just in your product, but just in the industry?
Yeah, that's a great question. We started out early days on NLP because we wanted to have a threat feed. Some of our requirements, like DFARS, were you have to have a threat feed. Well, we didn't. Once we got the threat feed into the platform, we didn't just want to have it just sitting there statically. Go over to your threat feed, look around at your threats. It's like going in your closet and hucking stuff around. So, my fellow co-founder and myself, he said, "Do you think NLP, could chew on, some of this language set and map into controls?" And I said, "Yeah, I think it can." So I just built out a large training set and tested it, and it worked. I mean, we got really good mappings into 853. And I kind of did a lot of research around it and figured out that the government had done some forays into it, but maybe not got anywhere. So the next bridge was really vulnerability theory. There's so much great work that's been done with vulnerability theory. I mean, the whole industry really, it's like lawyers on stacks of paper and on their bellies. That's how they roll. To some extent, to some extent, cyber is predicated on a lot of vulnerability theory, but it's never been analyzed, I don't think, as language, human language. So I did that. I decided to analyze it with human language and build processor to do the mapping, and that's been very helpful because as we integrate into scanning companies, we can actually reach into the description. We're not just saying, "Oh yeah, I'm doing scanning and lighting up those controls." We're actually pulling out the descriptions and mapping into additional controls like, information output validation, input validation, memory protection protocols, and things like that. So, the real exciting thing about NLP is the future, and crosswalking is part of that, getting all of the standards and regulations talking to each other. That's huge. We already do crosswalking, but now we're trying to do it in a way that at scale, really across as many frameworks as you'd like, across many, many controls, to understand the sort of in simultaneity where you are, if you're on 853, where you are on PCI, where you are on all of that. A lot of companies have tried to solve it, but that it hasn't. So we've been doing R&D around that for a long time, and we're going to have feature functionality in very soon on that. We already do it behind the scenes for customers, and then ultimately the future, which is all telemetry, all data is good information. Can you teach NLP? Can you? And I have staff who work on this. Can you teach it to recognize, incident response, behavioral analytics, all the great telemetry that our industry produces? And
you can,
we believe the answer
but it takes
yes.
more than NLP. It takes timing determinations. It takes natural language processing. It takes more about the telemetry of the human to understand urgency, how fast they're typing, how fast they're sending messages, who is responding and when. You're looking for patterns in the communications, not just the word choices that are used. Although the word choices are important, please don't get me wrong.
Right. Yeah, no, some of that, I mean, I'm not saying it's going to solve everything or boil the ocean. What I'm saying is that, you need to get the data into a specific kind of shape before you can do some of the additional heuristics you're talking about.
Agreed. And actually, in that sort of same vein, I'm going to throw Liam's question in the mix. Liam Downward, again from Cyrisma, said, "Is this an honor system? How do you see? How do you make sure that these things are happening? Vuln scans are happening, secure configurations, etc., rather than humans clicking the box?" Because if you're using the AI/ML NLP stuff to find these things, are you actually at Cybersaint actually doing it to make sure it's been done, or that somebody says it's been done?
Formerly says it's been done, right? So that the classic problem of compliance, so you said that, so what, right? But now with integration, they're pulling direct scans off of their own instantiation of Tenable or Qualys or whatever. So, I mean, in an evidentiary sense, it's real, right? And if they're going to auto-populate the controls using scan data, they've got to have the link into, the feed. So it's not, we don't have an agent that goes out and knocks on the door, like Brazil or, 1984 and says, "Hey,
can I see that data, please?"
You know what I mean?
Excuse me, where did you find that data? Do you have proof that it's your data? Yeah, no, I got
it. Right. We don't take them into a matrix and say, you guys aren't scanning in here, They just, put in the auth keys and everything else, and they import the data into their assessment environment via.
Okay, so you're getting the vulnerability scan data, but you're not necessarily getting the change management data, the config management data.
Well, we are because we're integrating into ServiceNow. We are getting the change management data and the config data. We're also doing that, and part of the challenge of automating is having the data model expand. So controls have to become configurable. Controls have to have inventories. Controls have to have, almost, spreadsheets sitting on them, ready to receive some of this data. Because, as you guys know, ServiceNow data is multi-field and pretty dense.
I'm very aware of that.
our time is running out. I do have one philosophical question I want to ask you very quickly, and then Patrick, I'll let you kind of give us some final thoughts, call to action as far as your company and your product. My philosophical question is: given that you're from what it sounds, very intimately familiar with lots and lots of frameworks and regulatory compliance standards. One difference that I've always seen, and I'm very PCI centric, and I admit it, PCI, at least theoretically, expects all or nothing. You're 100% there or not. Whereas many of the other frameworks and compliance standards, they sort of have, you just start with a baseline, and then over time you hope you improve, and you
Right.
pat yourself on your back for 15% improvements. So
Right.
you went from 20 to 35, but you still suck. My philosophical question is, does either sort of methodology work? Do they both not work? Is there, what's the right mix of how do you take a set of standards and rules and apply them to an organization?
That's a really good question. That's a deep question, I think, in some ways.
I did say it was philosophical.
Yeah, no, and I'm
what would Sam Beckett say?
Sam Beckett would say that that scoring models are in and of themselves just ways to view where you are, right? So they may be like just a telescope, a lens, a different magnification. Automation necessitates a more stringent scoring model in some respects. We've been talking about this in-house lately, because if you look at a policy object, it's on or it's off. It tends to be Boolean, right? It's yes, no. You have to have some of that Boolean embedded.
I'm going to disagree with you.
But a Boolean that, rolls up over 15 line items, all of a sudden you might have 11 out of 15, and you're, now you're talking about a partial, right? So it's really where you cut it that really matters. And I would say that the partial and the nearly and all of that, the PCI being like, yes, no, did you test? It's a hard answer. That it can be very effective because you know precisely where you are. The wiggle room, I think, historically comes out of the consultative model, which is you can be partially or nearly or minimally if you have a team of consultants that are helping you understand, what the future looks like and how to get to, a state where you're closer to maxed out. Maturity models historically, tend to, between 4 and 5 tend to, you need to get from 4 to 5 on a maturity model. You need 8 times the resource that you needed to get from 2 to 4, right? So there's other considerations like that in a maturity concept. But in a score concept, I think things are trending more toward the Boolean because automation is coming.
Great. Final thoughts for us, call to action. What would you like us to glean from Cybersaint Security? Yeah,
well, I just first thank you guys. This has been, a great conversation. I just want to throw that out there. I had a lot of fun. This is you've got a great show. I think call to action wise, I think for folks in compliance and risk, having been working shoulder to shoulder with them for years now and hearing, very large organizations' issues, I would say to hang in there. The complexity of, the problem is we all know it and we all have a bit of battle fatigue. So my call to action is, the future is coming. There's a lot of relief in sight. And automation and some of the other innovations that are coming along, are going to really, really change the way we do, the way we work. So legacy GRC and is fading, and the new ways of approaching it are going to be a lot more nimble and a lot more rational and sane. And that's really what I try to build into our product.
Cool. All right. Well, for our listeners and watching audience, if you want to learn more about Cybersaint Security, go to securityweekly.com/Cybersaint SCW. Not sure that's it, Johnny, but Cybersaint, and hopefully it autofills and gets you there. Or Google it. Anyway, thank you very much for joining us today, Patrick. We'll make sure we've got URLs correctly published and point people in the right direction. You're welcome back anytime. We've had a great discussion. Love the philosophical bent, and now I want to watch Waiting for Godot over the weekend. Not read it, but watch it. So we're going to take a quick break, come back, and we're going to get to know Flea a little bit.